Today we are going to tackle the building of the windlass in the bow of the boat. And I have to say I was not very happy with the instructions. Typical of these instructions, they leave a lot to be desired, and it's really as clear as mud. Lots of drawings, but they don't really tell you how the windlass fits onto the bowsprit. And a nice clean photograph of some of these technical things would really go a long way in making the kit easier to build for the amateur builder. The solution to this, of course, is just to dive in, and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. These things are not that difficult to build, and this is my second set, and there will be one final set before we get it all right. These are the diagrams that show you where goes what, and it's fairly straightforward. It's just we don't see how it fits on the bowsprit. So to make the columns, we set up the sliding table on the gym barns and actually make 6 columns because the odds of us making an error are pretty high. Then we reset the sliding table to mark off the top of the bit head, that little recess. And then that's followed by a further recess. The wood is about half of a millimeter. And this we use the Priac with a very fine slitting saw. And it just gives a very, very slight indentation into the column, just because we're going to carve this out with a chisel and then finally clean it down with a file. So we get a nice clean bit head that we can wrap ropes around. If I had to be critical, I would say that maybe I shouldn't have taken it down as deep as I did, but I think it's fine. We stuck it with CA again because we really want these pieces to not to move around too much. Because it's just so difficult to clamp them. And when it's all done, this is really what it looks like, which is pretty cool. To make sure you set the piece that goes into the bowsprit at the exact right height, you need to do this on the table. And again, I've used CA to make sure it sets quickly. If you feel the part is vulnerable, of course you can always pin it, because remember, all these pieces on the windlass are going to be painted black. The next thing we're going to do is make the 2 little side winches, and we're doing this out of a brass screw, just re-machining it. And I have to say, all in all, it came out pretty good, so I'm going to actually replace the ones that came with the kit and have all of them brass. Now we assemble the brass parts that we made up, and we're going to end up soldering these together so that it becomes one solid unit, which will make it much easier to put the nails and the brackets and fasten it all together. So off we go, out with the soldering iron. My only advice here is to use the least amount of solder possible. We did struggle to get the pieces lined up, so we did have to construct a little bit of a jig to make sure it was all correct. But in the end, we achieved what we set out to do. Then we made up the little clamps that hold the brass pieces to the wooden pieces. And I have a special pliers that makes this quite easy. And the most difficult part, as always, is putting the nails in. I really struggled with it, but in the end, I think it came out great. Of course, all that beautiful brass work is covered up with paint, but that's how it would have been done on the rail ship. We made up the handles using brass wire and soldering it together. and I was really quite happy at how it came out in the end. Once it was completed, we got some epoxy and epoxied it into the base, and of course painted the base black. In fact, we spray painted the entire assembly black because this sort of pulled everything together. Perhaps one of the more challenging actions that you're going to have is, as the built model is complete and you start putting in the various fittings like the hose holes, you have to be extremely careful, because a mistake here will damage the hull in such a way that it really cannot be fixed visually. We used PVA simply because it's easy to clean up, and again I will tell you that we measured at least 3 times to make sure that these holes were in the right spot. The kit called for the assembly to have brass dowels. I have no idea why. It's just so much easier if you have a wooden piece to use wooden dowels. So that's what we did. Again, lining up these holes was a real challenge. We probably should have done this first before we put the location of the hose holes, but in the end it worked out and there was no error, and it was in the exact spot it should have been. I can't stress enough that as you start adding these parts to the finished model, that you should use PVA, for the simple reason that PVA can be cleaned up dry, and if necessary you can wet the brush and clean it up with water. Of course, the problem with that is it tends to get over everything, so it's much easier to clean up the installation of the parts like we're doing here with a dry brush, and just clean the brush off afterwards so that the brush can be reused again. One of the main benefits of building 2 boats one after the other is that mistakes that you make on one, you can make sure that those don't reappear on the second one. Certainly there are less mistakes on the scratch built boat than there were on the kit boat. I make no apology for that. That's just the nature of the thing. And again, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes once you can correct the mistakes. Although sometimes it's useful to show the dowels. In the case of the bowsprit, the dowels are really just to hold it in place. They're nothing structural and certainly not part of the design of the model. And so we did this with matching wood. Certainly the most difficult part of the assembly was adding the lifters to the windlass. I used 5-minute epoxy to get them in place. That was just simply the only way that I could stick them, and I had to hold the model upside down. Maybe there's a better way to do this, but I couldn't come up with one. Now we're going to hook up the deadeye on the chain plates, and to do this we have a relatively simple method. You take a ring that you have cut off and cleaned up, then you heat it up and anneal them until it's red hot, and then cool down and it'll be very pliable. Place it around the deadeye like that, and you bend it around the deadeye, and it should bend fairly easy, and then take a pliers and pull it in. And then what you have effectively done is you have put the deadeye into a chain plate. To get a little hole in the end, we put a pin and take the pliers and tighten up around that, and then take it and get it soldered, and we have a completed part. And let's take you through the process using the elapsed time. We love this Proxon chop saw. It really makes the job so easy to do. We've cut out much more than we need, and then we go through the process of Again, making extra because you never know if you're going to mess up a few of them. I will normally do at least 6 or 8 extra pieces. Then we take it to solder, and a good hot soldering iron and a third hand makes light work of this. You will find sometimes the solder becomes a bit of a challenge and runs all over the place. Try to minimize the amount of solder you're using. And then over to the little drill press, and we drill the holes. We put 4 holes in each chain plate. That's what's specified on the sheet, and we assume that that's correct. This is my first time at blackening brass pieces. So we're going to take, just following the instructions. We can do this by painting it on or dipping it in. So I'm just going to dip it in. And immediately the piece starts to go black. We've dipped these in before and they are really doing great. Mind you, so is my pliers. I have to say this is much better than painting. It tends to darken the wood a little bit, which if you painted it on, that certainly wouldn't happen, or it would be a minimum. They also suggest that you wash off the piece afterwards. I've chosen not to do that. Continuing to struggle with the details, trying to find out where the chain wheel fits and how the chain plate fits on it. And again, been through all the plans, all the pictures, all the kits. Still uncertain, but this is the decision I've come to. I suppose what was most confusing is that the chain plates actually face back and not forward as they would typically do in a ship of this type. To help line up exactly where the chain plate goes, I've taken this off the plan. So that gives me a fairly good indication of how to line the chain plates up. It's a significant rake in the mast that causes the chain plates to face backwards. And now we're going to just blacken the pins. So now it's just ready, cleaning up and touching up and thinking about things, maybe the sequences we could have done differently. But all in all, we're very happy with how the final look comes, and all that's left now to do is to put the various fittings in, and that will start in the next video. So keep modeling and we'll see you then.